one of which would be our next subject, the Dudley Boys, and the time they were separated during the...
I said this. Like, the unexpected split between tag teams. What does that really do? Hey, yo, what's happening, peoples? It's your boy Blaze here, back at you with another one for Venomous Reaction. So today we got a video from Wrestle with Andy, and this is the biggest bust, WWE's worst draft picks. Woo! Recall the drafts they had in the past, and even in the present. I mean, there's some draft picks that actually hit and actually benefited one's career or a certain tag team's career. And then there was some that were questionable and some that just really didn't hit, like the unexpected split of a tag team or a certain wrestler moving to a roster they shouldn't been a part of. It has happened. So you got some that hit and then you got some that missed. So we're going to see what Wrestle with Andy is talking about with this one. So without further ado, let's check it out.
The WWE draft has been a staple of the company from 2002 onwards. In
fact,
outside of a brief gap between 2012 and 2016 when the brand extension wasn't active, there's rarely been a year that's gone by without it allowing the general managers of each show to mix their rosters up. But we're the worst draft picks of all time. Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. And to start than with the time Sanity was drafted from NXT to SmackDown in 2018. Why is this one so terrible? Well, because it pretty much spelled the end of the heel group being presented as any real threat in WWE. Seriously,
it did.
Well, before, they were considered one of the top factions on the Black and Gold brand, so much that they were even a key part of the first War Games bout in WWE. As soon as they made it to the main roster, any momentum they had quickly dissipated. Not that this was their fault, though. No, it was the...
I mean, he ain't lying, though. I mean, when Insanity was first brought to SmackDown, they really wasn't featured on the show that much. And the only person that actually stuck around basically was Nikki Cross. And she's on Raw. So bringing them up from the NXT roster to the main roster on SmackDown really did not help their careers too much. Except for one person. Safe to say, but it was a wasted pick. I'm just saying.
The terrible way they were booked, which caused the problem here, as upon debuting on the Blue brand on April 17th of that year, they immediately set about looking weak. Yes, even when they were occasionally scoring wins over the likes of the Usos and the New Day, they were still presented to look lesser, as it was clear WWE's booking staff saw them as little more than an undercard act in the long run. Of course, that perception wasn't helped by the fact that this wasn't even the full version of Sanity NXT fans had come to know and love. Rather, it was a bridged version, as while Eric Young, Alexander Wolf, and Killian Dane were all still there, Nikki Cross certainly wasn't. And the reason she wasn't there was because WWE felt it best to split her from the group before they even had a chance to show what they could do together on the main roster.
It really did not help.
To say then, this was a blow to the faction and contributed towards their swift downfall on Thursday nights. Hell,
slowly but surely,
they'd be losing 3-on-1 handicap matches to The Miz. So perhaps it's for the best the group disbanded altogether in April 2019, as by this point, it was the most humane thing anyone could do for them. Well, that doesn't make it any less of a failed call-up, and it just further proves the need for creative to always have a plan for someone before they move them anywhere new. Need any further evidence of this being the case? Just look towards our next subject, because Apollo Crews also suffered the same fate when he was moved from NXT to Raw in 2016. Now, we're not going to sit here and tell you Apollo Crews was blowing people away on the developmental brand prior to his main roster call-up during the mid-2010s. But that's nothing to do with his level of skill in the ring. No, the Sacramento native has always been more than capable of putting on a great show.
All facts, man. Apollo Crews is talented. Like, extremely talented. And I like his finisher, like the spin out, sit out power bomb. Yo, once I saw him do that, I was like, you know what? He's going to be destined for something great. Unfortunately, that something great has not happened. I mean, he may have racked up a few wins here and there, you know, with the U.S. title and Intercontinental Championship, but what has he done significantly? You get where I'm going with this.
The only reason he wasn't a big deal on NXT yet at this point, in fact, was because he just didn't have the time to make a proper impact. Seriously, while some people like Shinsuke Nakamura, Kevin Owens, and Finn Balor could have easily skipped the black and gold brand altogether as they were already complete packages, the common complaint about Apollo Crews' early days in WWE is that he wasn't given enough time to acclimatize himself to the promotion's way of doing things before he was thrust onto national television. Now, the most notable thing he got to under Triple H's watch was to have a brief feud with Baron Corbin. And because of that, once he started on Raw, it quickly became apparent he wasn't ready yet. Of course, this wasn't helped by the fact that it appeared that the main roster's writers weren't ready for him either. And we can say that for certain because during the first year there, he did little of note outside of getting one random win against Sheamus at June 19th's Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Had things been different though, and had he been given more to work with once he arrived, maybe Crews would have been able to adapt to the new style being asked of him quicker. And if that had happened, he might very well be in a better spot than he is today as a hugely overqualified jobber to the stars. But even if this is his current reality, at least he can rest easy knowing the same fate has happened to others too. In fact, only a couple of years later, it would also take place with our next subject when he was drafted from NXT in 2019. Who are we talking about here? Why, EC3, of course. Ah, yes. It's time to talk about the sad tale that was Ethan Carter III's main run on the WWE main roster. And part of the reason this one stands out so much is because the former two-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion was seemingly tailor-made to be a star under Vince McMahon's watch. After all, he certainly had both the look and the verbal skills, and he could also go in the ring as well when required. Something that was evident during his brief run in developmental, where he got to mix it up with the likes of Adam Cole and Ricochet. So this is why it was such a surprise when, upon his call-up to Monday nights, EC3 almost immediately got relegated to absolute jobberdom with his own...
That he did. I mean, I followed EC3's career from the TNA days, and I knew, like, he has something uniquely special because he's gifted on the mic and in the ring. But once he got to NXT, I mean, don't get me wrong, he had moments there too, but once he got up to the main roster, he quickly vanished into the background and got lost in the shuffle. And it wasn't long until he got released by WWE. So, another wasted pick that actually could have been good, but they did not capitalize on what EC3 could brought to the table. Bad break.
Only role for the most part being to run around backstage chasing R-Truth with the other people in the 24/7 title division. This clearly hurt the Ohio native as he no doubt knew he could be a bigger asset to the company if he was only given a chance. Hell, you can see it on his face after a certain point when he'd clearly already given up. Sure, he did get one high point with Dean Ambrose on an episode of The Red Brand in early 2019, but that was when the future three-time AEW World Champion already had one foot out of the door, so it wasn't like WWE were protecting him at this point. And as soon as this highlight was over, it was straight down to main event with EC3 for the most part, the place he'd spend the rest of his time up until the point he was released from his contract in 2020. Still, at least Ethan Carter did have a chance to redeem himself following this, as soon afterwards he'd sign on the dotted line with Billy Corgan and from there go on to become an NWA World's Champion. So in that sense, he has one up on our next subject as...
I mean, that's the thing, like, you know, when people leave WWE and go elsewhere, they actually find success. But it normally comes back and bite them in the ass that, you know, WWE could have used them a whole lot better when they were there, if they were just given a chance. Ironically, they really didn't want to take the chance on someone that they're unfamiliar with, so they went with the whole, if the Formula A broke, why fix it? With certain superstars. Unfortunately.
When it comes to Cedric Alexander, he's still wallowing away in the undercard of the main roster after a disastrous call-up from 205 Live to Raw in 2019. Yes, sometimes even escaping the purgatory that was 205 Live can end up being a bad thing for someone's career, because while the viewership was low, it was still better to be there than to be doing nothing on Monday nights. After all, whether it had a large audience or not, on 205 Live, Cedric Alexander was always treated like something closer to the star he knew he could be, as there, he got to have some pretty great bouts against the likes of Roderick Strong, Mustafa Ali, and Buddy Murphy, just to name a few. Once he was on Raw full-time though, all this changed, as there, he simply had no opportunity to be allowed to wrestle properly each and every week on Vince McMahon's flagship.
Unfortunately, that's the case.
It was usually in short throwaway matches which meant nothing in the long run. Hell, even when he did get something to work with in 2020 when he joined the Hurt Business, he was portrayed there as being the designated pin eater, someone so much lower down on the totem pole than the other members that he always found himself looking at the lights come the end of the night. That's right,
even though that is true, him being in the Hurt Business with, MVP, Bobby Lashley, Shelton Benjamin, it actually really did give him some momentum back. But when they decided to split the Hurt Business, that's when Cedric Alexander slid down the card again. All under Vince McMahon's watchful eye. Tragic.
The call-up of Cedric Alexander taught us anything, it's that sometimes it's better to be a big fish in a small pond than the other way around, as at least that way you can get a chance to shine and prove to fans you're able to be a star when given the opportunity. As it stands currently, however, it doesn't seem like such a thing is going to happen again for the former Cruiserweight champion anytime soon, as with the Hurt Business now having gone their separate ways, he's since gone back to just being a solo jobber act, one who rarely,
pretty much,
gets to appear on TV anymore. But it's not always the case that a bad call-up happens when a lower card act is moved from one brand to another. No, sometimes this occurs with a main event player too. And if you need any evidence of this being the case, you only have to look at what happened in 2006 when Kurt Angle was drafted from SmackDown to ECW. Why was this decision made? After all, on the face of things, it seemed like madness to take one of the best wrestlers in the world and bury them on what was effectively a developmental show. It would be like WWE today taking Seth Rollins and sequestering him away every week on NXT. Well,
yeah, honestly, Kurt Angle's move to ECW really didn't do too much. He was only there for what, a month or two before getting released or granted a release. Like, when they brought ECW back and you thought you was going to see the new vision of ECW, that really didn't work out to be the case. And having someone the caliber of Kurt Angle on the roster, only to be there just only under a few months before he got released, it really didn't help, in my opinion. True, you got to see the extreme version of Kurt Angle, the wrestling machine, but it was brief. So, I really don't know how to feel about that one, but it was not the best pick, in my view.
The answer to that question is twofold. Firstly, at least initially, WWE seemed to be making a genuine effort to have WWECW be a thing when its weekly show began in the summer of that year. And secondly, at this point in time, Kurt Angle was fast becoming something of a liability. Not because of his in-ring work, of course. No, that was just as great as it ever had been. Rather, it was because the Olympic gold medalist was so deep in the throes of drug addiction here, Vince McMahon was legitimately concerned for his health. So that's why it was decided to kill two birds with one stone by promoting Kurt in the hopes it would get him to pull himself together, all while giving WWECW a boost right as it was getting out of the starting gate. and Paul Heyman was certainly happy with this turn of events too, as it allowed him to use an all-time GOAT contender on a weekly basis and have him play one of his best incarnations, the Wrestling Machine. Sadly for Angle himself, however, such good feelings would not be reciprocated on his end because he took the whole thing as a major sign of disrespect, with it doing nothing to get him to clean himself up. Hell, it arguably had the opposite effect and sent him even further into a spiral, so much so that before the summer was out, he and Vince McMahon would mutually agree to part ways, with the Olympic hero at this point moving over to TNA and spending the rest of his full-time in-ring career there. Yes, so badly did this draft pick go, it directly led to one of the best to ever do it parting ways with the company that had made him famous. That said, it still arguably is not the worst switch in brands we can think of, as there are others even worse. One of which would be our next subject, the Dudley Boys, and the time they were separated during the...
I said this. Like, the unexpected split between tag teams. What does that really do? I mean, honestly, from my view, it's like a trial run when they decide to split up tag teams and see how they do, like, in a singles run. But in this case, the Dudleys, I really didn't see the point. I mean, you had Bubba on Raw, you had Devon on SmackDown. And only for them to reunite, like, less than a year later. Tell me, how does that work? Because I don't get it.
The 2002 draft. That's right, even as far back as the inaugural draft during the early 2000s, WWE were making bad decisions when it came to what superstars went where. Sure, this one did see some good choices, such as The Rock going to SmackDown, or The Undertaker making Raw his full-time home. But for as great as these selections were, they were balanced out by the sheer disaster that was the Dudley Boys being split up. Why were they split up? Well, because while Bubba Ray was moved to Raw full-time, Devon would instead be sent over to SmackDown, meaning the days of the pair hitting a 3D on a poor unsuspecting opponent was not temporarily put to an end. Sure, there was some logic to this, as Vince McMahon wanted to see if he could make singles stars out of the duo, particularly in the case of Bubba Ray. Pretty quickly, it became apparent they were better off together. Not that they wouldn't have any success as solo acts, of course. No, over on Raw, the future TNA World Champion would get a few runs with the Hardcore title, and while his partner's time on the Blue brand didn't amount to much in the long run, it did at least introduce us to future main eventer and Hollywood star Dave Bautista. That said, outside of these isolated moments, there wasn't much to write home about, and it was obvious fans wanted the pair to reunite. So that's why WWE decided to course correct later that year then, when they had Devon jump to Monday nights, and there revive his partnership with Bubba Ray.
I did say that, like, in less than a year, they were back together at Survivor Series. Like, what was the point of splitting them up in the first place? Like, I really didn't get it, but I guess I can understand it, like, to see how they do in the singles run. But the only one who somewhat benefited was Bubba when he had the Hardcore title. Other than that, there was really no benefit there. I mean, other than Devon bringing in the upstart, which would be later known as the Animal, Batista. Other than that, nothing really came out of this, so I didn't get it.
Of course, it would have just been better if they'd never had to do this at all, though, and had instead kept going with what worked.
Exactly.
After all, splitting the Dudleys in 2002 would be like splitting up the Road Warriors in the 80s or the Young Bucks in the modern day, something no one wants to see. But the very fact it was rectified before too much damage was done means this one can't rank as the worst draft pick of all time. No, for that, we have to look to another subject, perhaps even our next one, as when Rey Mysterio was moved from SmackDown over to Raw in 2008, it took him from the main event to what was effectively the mid-card in record time. Why was this? Well, despite being treated as a top-level talent on the Blue brand between his debut in 2002 and his exit during the latter years of the decade, someone who, even if he was small, was able to defeat opponents such as Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle, and Randy Orton, once he was shifted over to Raw in 2008, things changed, as there, Ray, for some reason, was allowed to slip down the card. Sure, he did get his moments.
Yeah, he did.
He was involved in the championship scramble for the World Heavyweight title at Unforgiven on September 7th of that year, but these moments were few and far between. For the most part, he'd instead be placed in programs with the likes of Kane and JBL, programs which, while nothing to outright dismiss, were below what a man of his talents should have been doing at this stage of his career. So maybe that's why 1 year later in 2009, WWE realized the error of their ways and drafted Ray
and brought him back to
his
SmackDown
home of Thursday nights. But while this was the best decision for the company to have made at this moment in time, it did shine a further light on how nonsensical the original move had been in the first place. After all, given how quickly he abandoned it, it's clear Vince McMahon had no real plans for the former Cruiserweight champion on the Red brand. So it leaves us to ask the question,
that's no shot.
Might have been occurring at all. Was it just an attempt to shake things up by taking a beloved star and putting them somewhere they'd never been before? Maybe. But if this was the case, you'd have thought the Lucha legend would have gotten bigger things to do during his time on Raw. And this isn't the only time a seemingly
which was not the case.
Was made either, as just 2 years later, the same thing happened in an even worse way when John Cena was drafted for Raw to SmackDown and then back to Raw again on the same night.
That part confused me. I'm not gonna lie. Because how you gonna have John Cena drafted to SmackDown, only to draft him back to Raw at the end of the show? I guess, like, no comment.
Okay, we'll admit we can see what WWE were trying to do here, as it potentially allowed for a fun one-night angle where both sides were vying to obtain the services of the biggest star in the industry.
Yeah, the face of WWE.
Though, was that by that point, the draft no longer involved general managers coming out to choose who they wanted to be on the roster. No, instead, the entire
they were randomly selected.
A random person generator on the Titantron. So this meant there was no sense of strategy in what occurred on April 25th of that year, or any feeling that it was a battle between the brands. Rather, it just came off as a computerized system trolling both fans and the company itself in true Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fashion. Yes, as we alluded to a moment ago, after Big Match John was selected the first pick of the night, meaning he'd moved from Raw to SmackDown, fans were excited as for a brief time, it felt just the way it had when he made his shock move over to Raw in 2005. Sadly, though, a big bucket of metaphorical cold water was thrown all over any sense of excitement people had by the end of the night, as Cena was revealed as the last draft pick of the night, with this meaning he'd go right back to Raw to the Red brand again. So basically, what we had with this one then was a joke which could have worked out better under different circumstances.
Yeah, that was a major swerve. I'm not gonna lie, that was a swerve. Here we are thinking, John Cena, he's going back to SmackDown, only to have them throw a major swerve. Like, nope, he's staying on Raw. he is like the only person to ever get drafted by both shows in the same night. While that is low-key hilarious, it's also confusing. Like, why would you have that happen in the first place? That's Vince McMahon for you.
But which flopped hard at the time. And to make matters worse, it also ate up 2 full slots in the draft lottery, which could have been put to much better use by switching a couple of other performers and refreshing them
also
the process
facts.
Instead. Yes, sometimes it's best not to turn your annual draft into a mockery and instead try to keep it feeling like a legitimate thing.
Low-key they did, though.
More invested in the long run. But then,
low-key they did this
that
year,
though. Feel as strong as it should be. After all, this is the company where you can apparently just turn up on any show you want anyway. Well, mostly, because when it comes to our next subjects, they wouldn't get to just appear on the other show at any time of their choosing. No, when Jim Ross and Michael Cole were switched in 2018, it meant a permanent end to JR's run as a full-time announcer on Raw. Of course, this wasn't necessarily a terrible move on the face of things. Hell, it could have been a great decision if things were done a little differently. After all, Ross had been the voice of Monday nights for so long by that point, it was a given things were going to grow a little stale eventually.
Yeah, low-key, JR was the voice of Raw since it started. Like, you never saw him on any other show, like, except for those few occasions on SmackDown when he was filling in for somebody, like, filling in for, like, I believe Michael Cole at one point, just to help balance out the team behind the commentators table. But once they made the switch, like Michael Cole to Raw and JR to SmackDown, like JR's been the voice of Raw, just like Michael Cole was basically the voice of SmackDown at this point. Only to have them switch roles is like, yo, even Michael Cole and JR was like shocked, like, okay, I cannot believe this is happening, but it happens, so gotta roll with it.
So for him to find a new home with a whole new roster he could call should have been something positive then. And the exact same thing could be said when it came to Michael Cole, too. Hell, by this point, he was clearly being positioned as JR's successor, so having him helm the Red brand felt like the most natural thing in the world. So why was it all a disaster in hindsight? Well, because the way Vince McMahon chose to go about making the move was to not tell either party ahead of time, and instead wait for them to find out on live TV, right as the rest of the world did. That's right,
yeah,
the boss had long been
accused
of someone who loved to poke fun of Jim Ross, and this just seems like yet another example of that, as you can see the hurt in the Oklahoman's face as soon as the announcement is made. Was he not important enough to be told this ahead of time? Was he not good enough for Raw anymore? These are some of the questions that were no doubt going through his mind. But WWE didn't notify JR, and so for this reason, the drafting of JR and Michael Cole in 2008 has to go down as a less than perfect draft move.
Yeah, I can see why that was the case.
First example of a bad draft pick ever, as we still have another which could potentially fill such a spot. Who are we talking about this time? Why, who else but Snitsky, and the time he was shifted over from ECW to Raw in 2007. It wasn't his fault. That was always the line Gene Snitsky spouted whenever someone accused him of any wrongdoing. And while we can't exactly say he was innocent when it came to ending Lita's kayfabe pregnancy, he certainly isn't the main culprit to blame when it comes to him moving over to the Red brand in 2007. No, the persons at fault here were the WWE creative team, as almost immediately upon arriving at his new home, it was clear things just weren't going to work out for the Pennsylvania native. And
not at all.
If we're being perfectly honest, most fans had forgotten about him by then. Sure, this wasn't helped by the fact he'd spent the months prior working in the dead zone that was WWECW.
I mean, honestly, Snitsky should have just stayed on ECW. I mean, he was built up as this like monstrous heel, and then you bring him over to Raw. Like, this is not the same Snitsky that you once knew. Like, not the whole Mr. It wasn't my fault. Not that Snitsky. A completely different person. And for Snitsky's case, his move to Raw was a bit insignificant. Because no memorable moments. He was just there to occupy space. Sad but true.
But even that can't take the full brunt of the blame here. What can take the blame then? Terrible booking during his last run on Monday nights prior to that? Yeah.
Yep.
And because of this, by the time he returned to Raw in a non-triumphant fashion during the summer of 2007, the stink of his awful history was still there. It didn't matter.
Yeah, you can't get away from that one even if you tried.
The reality was, Snitsky wasn't going to get over with fans on the main roster anymore. And that's why he should have just remained in ECW, where his skills could have been put to better use on a smaller stage. But alas, this wasn't the decision WWE made, and so because of that, the sad tale of Snitsky ended with a whimper instead of a bang.
He wasn't lying there. A lot of worst draft picks ever. And to end it off with that one says a lot. I mean, there's been like decisions that WWE has made that really didn't make sense, but there's been draft picks on there that just leaves you scratching your head. Like the whole Michael Cole and JR, like I called that one. Neither party knew about it, but they found out just like everyone else when it was happening right then and there. So that made the whole draft pick between those two kind of shitty. Because how can you not notify the respective voices of their brand that they're gonna make a swap? I mean, granted the fact that Michael Cole was pretty much in line to be like JR's successor, like being the voice of Raw, but even still, like to catch everyone off guard, I mean, like I said, it is kind of shitty, but low-key, it kind of worked. It kind of. I mean, because once they got to their new brand homes, they managed to pick up and find their footing and not lose a step. But I want to know y'all thoughts on this one. Well, could these picks have been better? I just want to know. Let me know down in the comment section down below. And as always, thank y'all for tuning in. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this one, and don't forget to tell your peoples across the globe. Come kick it with your boy just one good solid time. Like, comment, subscribe. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to click that bell so you don't miss a video from the kid. You heard me. And please feel free to follow me on social media right over yonder. Now this is your boy Blaze saying Chuck the Deuce, and I will see y'all in the next video. And I'm out.